There was nothing private left to protect. The first weekend I had the cabin keys in hand, I drove up alone. The front door was still the faded green Colby always complained about. I bought a can of paint, nothing fancy, and spent the afternoon repainting it myself, slowly, without an audience. No one clapped. No one needed to. I just sat on the porch afterward and let the quiet feel like mine. People used to say I was too quiet to matter, too responsible to be interesting. For years, I thought that was a weakness. I understand now it was cover, the kind that let me watch, gather, and prepare while everyone assumed I was simply standing still. Generosity mistaken for weakness gets exploited. It always does, until you stop explaining yourself and start documenting instead. I've thought about that night often, the moment I decided to wait 6 weeks instead of confronting her the day I found that box. Would you have exposed her right then, in the storage unit, voice shaking? Or would you have waited to let the evidence build until there was nothing left to argue with? I don't regret the wait. I don't regret the silence either. Because this isn't a story about revenge, it never was. Her life is unraveling, piece by piece, under the weight of choices she made. Mine is finally mine, built on nothing borrowed and nothing stolen. I didn't take my life back all at once. I took it back piece by piece, starting with the truth. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I sat across from the notary, watching her stamp each page with the calm precision of someone who had no idea what these documents actually meant. To her, it was routine. To me, it was the end of a marriage, a business, and an inheritance my sister thought was already hers. Colby didn't know yet. She was probably at home right now, planning her anniversary party, completely unaware that 3 states away, I was signing the paperwork that would unravel everything she'd built on my name. My sister didn't just borrow my life. She filed it as her own, my credit, my signature, my identity, folded quietly into hers for years. But to understand what I was signing, you need to go back 4 years, to the night I found the storage unit no one was supposed to open. Growing up, there were 2 roles in our family, and I filled mine before I even understood I'd been assigned it. I was the responsible one. The one who got good grades without anyone asking, who paid her own way through architecture school in Tacoma, who never needed rescuing. Colby was the other kind of daughter, the one who needed rescuing constantly, and somehow that made her the favorite. She was 2 years younger and twice as charming. Every failed venture, the jewelry line, the fitness studio, the wellness retreat that never opened, my parents funded without blinking, and every time, it was framed as investing in her potential. No one ever asked what my potential might need. In 2019, when Colby wanted to open a boutique, I co-signed her business loan. I didn't think twice. That's what family did, or so I believed. What I didn't know was that 18 months later, she'd quietly had me removed as an authorized signer, filing new paperwork with the bank while I was still making payments on a loan I no longer had any legal say over. Around that same time, I let her store some of her overflow inventory in my storage unit, the one under my name, the one I paid for. Just for convenience, she said. I gave her a KEY. In our family group chat, her wins were announced like headlines. My existence was mostly a formality, a happy birthday here, silence everywhere else. I told myself it didn't matter. Then, one Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Reunion is set for the 14th. Everyone needs to be there. It's important this year. I had no idea yet how important. I went to the storage unit on a Sunday, telling myself I just wanted to sort through old sketches before the reunion. What I found instead was a banker's box I didn't recognize, tucked behind my grandmother's china. Inside were folders, neat, organized, labeled in Colby's handwriting. Loan applications. Credit inquiries. A business registration for a boutique I'd co-signed for years ago, except the name on the documents wasn't quite mine, and wasn't quite hers. Maren Colby Whitfield. My social security number. My credit history, quietly borrowed and rebuilt under a name close enough to pass, Far enough to confuse anyone who wasn't looking closely. I sat on the concrete floor of that unit for almost an hour before I moved. The next morning, I requested my full credit report. 3 accounts I'd never opened stared back at me, 2 credit lines and a small business loan, all opened between 2020 and 2022, all tied to addresses I'd never lived at. I didn't call Colby. I didn't call my mother. Instead, I called a forensic accountant a colleague had once mentioned in passing, and by Thursday, I'd retained an attorney who specialized in identity fraud within families, apparently common enough to have a specialty. Something shifted in me during those first appointments. The grief I'd been carrying, the quiet ache of always being second, started hardening into something else. Resolve. Clarity. I began saving every voicemail where Colby mentioned helping me out with paperwork. I screenshot the family group chat, every dismissive comment, every time my achievements were met with silence while hers got fireworks. I filed a police report on a Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break, and told no one. Meanwhile, my mother called twice a week about the cabin. Just let Colby handle the deed talk, don't make it complicated, she said. Can't you just keep the peace this once? I said I would think about it. I was already past thinking. Over the next 6 weeks, while they planned Colby's anniversary party, I built a file 3 inches thick. The anniversary party was held in the same backyard where, 6 weeks earlier, Colby had announced she was taking the cabin deed and called me someone who'd never do anything with it anyway. This time, I arrived with my attorney, Patricia, a woman who didn't raise her voice because she never needed to. Colby saw us walk in and smiled the way she always did when she assumed she'd already won. She probably thought I was there to concede on the cabin, maybe even apologize for making things complicated. She had no idea what was in the envelope Patricia was holding. I asked for everyone's attention before the toasts began. My mother looked pleased, assuming I was finally going to publicly hand over the deed. Instead, Patricia opened the notarized letter and began reading, calmly, methodically, dates, account numbers, a name, Maren Colby Whitfield, used on 3 fraudulent credit applications between 2020 and 2022, totaling $47,000 in unauthorized debt, and a forged signature on a business loan that removed me as a signer without my knowledge. The backyard went silent in a way I'd never heard it go silent before. Colby's husband, Derek, went pale first. I told you something felt off with the accounts, he said quietly, almost to himself, before looking at Colby. You said it was handled. Patricia stepped forward and handed Colby the subpoena. Not an apology. Not a plea. A subpoena. My mother's face cracked in real time, the realization landing that every time she'd told me to keep the peace, she'd been asking me to stay silent while my sister quietly stole my name. Then I played the voicemail. Colby's own voice, casual, almost bored, from 8 months earlier. I just needed my name to look good for the investors. She'll never notice, she never pays attention to that stuff anyway. No one spoke. Derek sat down slowly. My father stared at his hands. Colby's mouth opened, then closed, no charm left to reach for. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one standing quietly in the corner of a room while my sister took up all the air in it. Within 2 weeks, Colby's business partner withdrew from their partnership agreement, citing undisclosed financial liabilities. The fraud investigation moved faster than I expected. Apparently, $47,000 across 3 accounts leaves a clean enough trail when someone finally decides to follow it. The boutique closed within 2 months. The storefront sign taken down on a grey Tuesday morning I only knew about because a neighbor sent me a photo. Unprompted, the cabin deed reverted to me, exactly as my grandmother had written it decades earlier, before anyone thought to question whose name belonged where. I didn't call to check on Colby. I didn't send flowers or a card or a careful text checking how everyone was holding up. I blocked the family group chat the same week, watching the notifications finally go quiet after years of noise that was never meant for me anyway. I changed the locks on my apartment, not because anyone had a key, but because I wanted the decision to be mine. My mother called twice, wanting to talk privately, just the 2 of us. I let both calls go to voicemail. There was nothing private left to protect. The first weekend I had the cabin keys in hand, I drove up alone. The front door was still the faded green Colby always complained about. I bought a can of paint, nothing fancy, and spent the afternoon repainting it myself, slowly, without an audience. No one clapped. No one needed to. I just sat on the porch afterward and let the quiet feel like mine. People used to say I was too quiet to matter, too responsible to be interesting. For years, I thought that was a weakness. I understand now it was cover, the kind that let me watch, gather, and prepare while everyone assumed I was simply standing still. Generosity mistaken for weakness gets exploited. It always does, until you stop explaining yourself and start documenting instead. I've thought about that night often, the moment I decided to wait 6 weeks instead of confronting her the day I found that box. Would you have exposed her right then, in the storage unit, voice shaking? Or would you have waited to let the evidence build until there was nothing left to argue with? I don't regret the wait. I don't regret the silence either. Because this isn't a story about revenge, it never was. Her life is unraveling, piece by piece, under the weight of choices she made. Mine is finally mine, built on nothing borrowed and nothing stolen. I didn't take my life back all at once. I took it back piece by piece, starting with the truth.